Hello and welcome along to the Euro Champions League podcast from sportsbet.io. Don't forget, every single Champions League round we have a Tuesday and a Wednesday version of this, and there's also plenty of coverage of the European leagues, the Bundesliga, La Liga and Serie A, all on this YouTube channel as well. We're joined today by our brand new friend Daniele Fisichella, who I hope his surname I've got right. Is that have I got that about right?
Perfect. Pete, well done. Thank you.
There we go. It's all I've done all weekend is practice that surname. It's another really interesting week of Champions League action. A lot of sides who are underperforming, needing to turn it around. We will start with a really good-looking game in prospect, which is Bayern Munich against PSG. Bayern's form, obviously, since that Barcelona win has been absolutely exceptional, not conceding, scoring a ton of goals. PSG comfortably top of Liga, Daniele, but in Europe, they're just struggling a lot, aren't they?
They are struggling. They are conceding goals. They've underperformed, I would say. And at the moment, they find themselves in a very perilous situation. Has to be said that PSG were handed the toughest draw of everyone. Yeah. And if you look at the fixtures to come, they only have to host Manchester City, although someone might argue that's an easy game, and play Stuttgart away. But yes, PSG not great at the moment. And now they go to Munich for a classic, Champions League classic. They've been playing 13 times in the history of the UEFA Champions League, these two sides. And by the way, the odds for the German victory have never been as low as they are now in some betting markets. That maybe have shifted. But, you know, Bayern Munich are a juggernaut, especially in these group stages. They scored more than anyone else in the group stages of the Champions League across matches, average 2.89 goals. They are unbeaten in 32 home Champions League groups since losing to Manchester City. But the last game they won was tight, 1-0 against Benfica with a very rare Musiala header goal. The headlines are for Harry Kane, who grabbed another hat-trick, smashed Haaland's record. It seems that things are working a little bit better for Vincent Kompany, but he's still under scrutiny. You know, he's never managed at such a high level. When it comes to PSG, 3-0 wins at the weekend against Toulouse, perhaps a little bit deceptive. They lost the XG on that occasion, but they got so much talent up front. Of course, they can convert even difficult shots. Harry Kane, 13 goals in 16 Champions League appearances for Bayern Munich, almost as many as Asensio, Dembélé, and Barcola together for PSG. So obviously that's where the experience lies. But yeah, certainly Bayern favorites for this one. Almost last chance PSG if they want to finish in the top 8.
It's bizarre, isn't it? PSG have had such a tough run, but like you say, it's also been an extremely tough fixture list for them. I think what's impressed me the most about Bayern Munich in the last couple of weeks, certainly since that Barcelona loss, is you saw Vincent Kompany playing a style of football where there was constant pressure, there was a really high line, and he's still doing that. But there's also been a little bit more pragmatism, shall we say, where he's been slightly smarter. They're still attacking, but he's changed things ever so slightly. There's a tiny bit of a deeper line. There's a tiny little less pressure. And that's paying dividends because right now, looking at this game, it's actually quite hard, I think, to see PSG scoring.
Yes, of course. They don't find it easy this season, PSG, to score goals. Of course, it's difficult to come back from seasons when you had Kylian Mbappe scoring almost 40% of your goals. But you're right with Bayern Munich. Sometimes that gung-ho approach needs to be ditched. And they've been even more direct sometimes, throwing long, kicking into Harry Kane's feet, who can hold it ever so well. So yeah, change of tactics probably was needed, but I think yes, they should be considered favorites. By the way, in this Champions League, Bayern have conceded the second fewest shots, 22. PSG, the fewest shot on target, 21. But they've been exposed by Atletico Madrid in the later stage of that game. Also, a couple of mistakes of Donnarumma as well in there. So yeah, I think they're in for a tough night.
Conceded almost no shots and he got hit for 4 by Barcelona. What a weird combination that is, I suppose. Really interesting game. I'm with you, though, a comfy Bayern win for me. We'll move on to Inter against Leipzig. Now, obviously, Inter have got a couple of key injuries. The likes of Hakan Çalhanoğlu is not 100% fit at the moment. But Leipzig have hit a really tricky spell, and particularly in Europe as well, obviously lost away at Celtic. This is another game where normally looking at it on the face of it, you'd go, oh, Leipzig have a great chance. But actually, the more you dig into it, or certainly the more I dug into it, Daniele, the more I could only see an Inter win here.
Inter have been extraordinary in the Champions League, facing Manchester City and Arsenal, still keeping 4 clean sheets alongside Atalanta. And they've got a great record in the Champions League. I think they're unbeaten in 11 Champions League home matches. And, in a Champions League where the most common results at the moment is 1-0 or 0-1,
Right?
almost 12% of the games have finished with this outcome. An Italian team with a solid defense, with a good 3-5-2 formation, and with some creativity up front, I think they're going to gain some advantage. In tight margins, Inter are smart, have got much better. The Champions League run to the final in 2023 has increased the confidence, and we've seen different phases of the games. They can suffer, as they did against Arsenal. They can defend deep, they can defend positionally, but they can spring into attacks, and early in September, they had good chances to score against Manchester City. That's maybe one of the red flags for Manchester City when they saw how vulnerable they were, and Rodri was still there. By the way, Inter could have won that game. But Inter, 5-0 win at the weekend, scored 5 goals in the first half against Verona with it was probably the story of the weekend. Angel Correa hasn't started a game for Inter in almost 2 years, hasn't scored for Inter in almost 3 years. So what does Simone Inzaghi do? Put him starter at Verona, and Correa gives 2 assists and scores. And he's the 5th attacker of Inter, which last season they sent him on loan to Marseille. Man management from Inzaghi is spot on. Team rotations are spot on. So you can imagine Inter being fully fit, fully rested for this one. Leipzig, on the other hand, I think they are deceptive. 7 clean sheets in the Bundesliga, more than anyone else. Conceded 4 at the weekend. They conceded in all the Champions League games so far. A good front 3 with Openda, with Sesko, with other players, with Musa coming into that. But if you look at the underlying numbers, I think they suggest a very different story. Inter are overperforming their expecting goals against in the Champions League by 5.6. Well, of course, they didn't consider any, so they're obviously overperforming. But the Leipzig, on the other hand, they are underperforming the expected goal against by 2. So they should have considered even more. So I think the 7 clean sheets in the Bundesliga, it is deceptive. Inter favorites here. If it's a low-scoring game, I think Inter wins it. Inter edges it. A high-scoring game, that's where there could be issues. Inter have conceded 13 goals in Serie A so far, so not as watertight as they used to be. But I think Inter in this case have the advantage.
Yeah, you mentioned there the common score of 1-0 in the Champions League. This game to me just looks like a 1-0 sort of almost guaranteed. Not that we are guaranteeing it, but almost guaranteed. We'll move on to Sporting against Arsenal. Obviously, Sporting were one of the stories of the previous round in beating Manchester City, although that was obviously under different circumstances. Arsenal got a really good Premier League win at the weekend. But in Europe, while Arsenal haven't been terrible, Daniele, they have felt a little bit tighter and a little bit kind of more... nervy's the wrong phrase, but they just haven't looked as loose and as confident and as sharp as they can do in the Champions League. This is a game where, obviously, they're going up against one of the most informed strikers in the world, in Victor Gyökeres, who is a great, I'm sure, goal scorer bet here as well. But I wasn't hugely keen at a slightly shorter price to jump on Arsenal here.
It all depends on the impact of Martin Odegaard. And we've seen how good he's been. Last two games, 2 assists, one for Martinelli, one for Saka. And I think he's the catalyst, he's the spark. They don't have a player like him in the roster. And him coming back, it's huge. At the weekend, they put aside Nottingham Forest and they were in full flow, really attacking, especially on the right-hand side, a combination between Odegaard and Saka. But you are right. Sometimes they've been a bit ponderous, Arsenal. And they found, especially the away trips, both to Italy against Atalanta and against Inter, difficult. With Inter, they knocked on the door a lot, but after all, they almost ran out of the idea. I think they put 36 crosses in, including the corners. Wow. And they seemed almost to repeat the same game plan. Odegaard only came at the end. Are they going to have something different here? It could be, maybe. Look, this is gonna be a different one to judge. Sporting Lisbon got a new manager, by the way.
Yeah.
João Pereira won at the weekend 6-0 in the Cup of the Portugal against a third division side, Amarante. Which, by the way, I think the Portuguese league are very smart, and I noticed it from a couple of seasons before the Champions League round. Often than not, there is a cup game, but it's a cup game
Right.
old style where the Portuguese teams play. The seeded teams play the lower seeded teams. So
Yeah.
therefore, your likes of Sporting, Benfica, Porto in the UEFA Europa League have played this weekend lower league sides. Now, the results in Europe are mixed. They don't always win the following games.
Yeah.
By advantage, just to give you an example, Gyökeres rested at the weekend. They won 6-0, of course. Came on in the second half, scored, as he does. But probably is the best preparation for such an intensity games.
That's really interesting. That's really, really interesting. I'd not noticed that before. But I mean, you can't. The results that Portuguese teams then get is not on you. But if you, as a Portuguese league, can set them up to get good results, the results aren't on you. It's if you can help a little bit, then that's going to pay dividends eventually further down the line. That's fascinating.
I think he has paid dividends in a way because I think they are overperforming compared to the size of the league and compared to the talent pool they got. But also they've been very smart in the recruitment. By the way, this will be the 7th time they meet, Sporting and Arsenal, and actually. Sporting had never beat Arsenal, although they knocked them out a couple of seasons ago from the Europa League. But the odds for a Sporting win have never been so low. I mean, they're quite high. You're looking around 3, so that tells you how things have shifted this season and passes.
It's absolutely fascinating, but again, it's just a weird thing where I just don't want to jump onto Arsenal away in the Champions League at the moment. That's maybe just my nerves rather than anything else. But you're right. I mean, the impact that Martin Odegaard has had, not just with the assist, but with everything, the entire shape of Arsenal looks so much better with him in it. And an extraordinary player who, we've been talking about for 20 years, I think, at this point. Started his career when he was 9 or whatever it was. Right, we'll go to Man City Feyenoord to finish the Tuesday preview of this week. I mean, if you're Feyenoord and you're told you get one time to play Manchester City, this is probably the time you want to choose. They got a good win in the Eredivisie this season. I actually think Man City win this, but they're a very, very strange side at the moment. They seem to have had confidence just fall away from them.
Spare a thought for all those managers who are under pressure after 3-4 results. Pep Guardiola loses four in a row, and here is a 2-year contract extension. Here we go, Pep. Stay for 2 more years. Now you've lost 5 in a row. Jokes aside, if anyone deserves that, is obviously Pep. But this is not a blip. It's not a blip, it's a crisis. Of course, it's a crisis. Sunday, they play Liverpool. If they lose, they go 11 points behind in the Premier League. The Premier League title race might well be over. The numbers say that this City side, it's very, very gettable. And I mentioned before the game at the Etihad Inter had with a couple of good chances. Those were the signs. Rodri was still there at the weekend against Spurs. Rodri and Kovacic were not playing. Only the second time didn't happen. Spurs were breaking loose. City had 23 attempts, Spurs only had 9, but 6 of them were fast breaks, and they produced the goals on the counter. A telling stats is that this season is the season where Manchester City concedes more shots against on the counter attack, average 1.2 per game on the counter in the 9 season that Pep Guardiola has been there. So they are extremely vulnerable because the blueprint hasn't changed. They commit player forward. They like to dominate possession, but the lack of the linchpin, Rodri, of course, but it can also be down to mental fatigue, if you like. Means they are gettable. So I think Feyenoord are gonna get chances. Doesn't mean they're gonna win here. I think I agree with you. City are gonna come back. After all, that defeat against Spurs was the only one in the last 52 games at the Etihad. So I think they're gonna revert to mean, if you like. But you might want to look at Feyenoord's goal scorers, Ayase Ueda score a couple, score against Sturm Graz or others in the goal scoring market. I think that could be a smart bet here, or a high scoring game. Yes, I think City bounces back, but it is worrying how many chances they are giving the opposition, especially so early on in games.
And I think, with all due respect to Kyle Walker, I think at the moment he's having a pretty terrible season. And if you are a manager, you are identifying the City right-hand side and saying this is where we can really go. Forget Walker's pace. Everything else down this left-hand side for us is key. And I think that's certainly paying dividends at the moment. Daniele, thank you very much. Daniele will be looking at Wednesday for us as well, but a fascinating look into the Tuesday Champions League action.